Welcome to HomeWord. I'm Jim Burns. As you know, people mess up. I do. Everybody does. And guess what? I think God is okay with the messes in our life. And today we're going to talk about from porn, infidelity, and shame to victory. Your best days can be ahead of you. But sometimes it's not your best days if you don't make good choices. And you know this, I know this. And there's a lot of people who are listening who actually, probably more people than you would imagine, who struggle in the area that we're going to talk about today. They bring their childhood pain into adulthood sometimes. They can't even identify that it was childhood pain. And their poor choices, their actions begin to sort of leak out, if you would, when they become adults, sometimes when they're younger. No one starts out wanting to have a plan to be addicted to porn or to be involved in infidelity. In hindsight, it's a plan that is not as clear. And in hindsight, it becomes more clear, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I have some good news for you, and I have some good news for your friends, and I have some good news for your loved ones who are caught in difficult cycle of addiction. Your best days can be ahead of you. Now, again, I'm not going to say it's easy, and I'm not just going to say that, you pray once and, God restores everything. It's not that easy. You can make the right choices to seek help and to heal. And that's what we're going to talk about today with one of my treasured friends in life. No one said it was easy, but there are millions of people who have moved from porn addiction, infidelity, and shame to victory. And you're going to meet a person right now who I love and adore. I truly mean this. He's one of the special people in my life. And he has made that decision. His name is Chris Cannon. Chris is, like I said, a treasured friend of my life. I have a deep respect for Chris. And I've always had a deep respect for Chris. He has a story. And we're going to talk about this story. It's not an easy story to tell. It's not a fun story necessarily, but actually at the end, there's some great victory, and the victory happens on a daily basis, but it's day to day. Okay. Chris leads the pastor-to-pastor ministry of HomeWord, and he talks to pastors every day. He's married to Ann, and they have adult children. They have grandkids. And he talks to me more about his grandkids than he does about his adult children anymore, but that's another story. Most days, you're going to find Chris talking and encouraging pastors who are going through tough and difficult situations. Well, sometimes you're going to see him coaching soccer. He's pretty competitive on the pickleball court, so I'm told. I choose not to play with him because I think he'd kill me and beat me. And maybe actually out catching a few waves here in Southern California. But it's a pleasure and an honor to have Chris with us today as we talk about from porn, infidelity, and shame to victory. Your best days can be ahead of you. Chris.
Jim. Self-soothing comes in many forms, and for some people, it might take the form of drinking or eating or gambling. For me, it was porn. I remember at the age of 8, my neighbor's pool was always open for us. Well, not always open, but we would go down and swim. And the neighbor, he had a Playboy magazine collection in the bathroom, and we would go use the restroom, and there was this magazine, and I remember opening it and knowing it was mysterious and exciting all at once, and seeing these pictures, and it was a different time. It was the late 60s when that was more common to have out in the open.
Sure.
But it became something that I knew was a secret. There was some shame and there was some intrigue and there was some sense of excitement all wrapped up into one.
Yeah.
And
Very
then
well said.
going into adolescence when, I remember part of the recovery world is that we find out that our insides don't match the outsides of others.
Yeah.
What we see doesn't match. So we begin, at least for me, I began to internalize, I don't feel like everyone else seems to feel. And I found that one way of escape from that world was fantasy. And the fantasy wasn't always naked women. It might be imagining myself as a sports player playing on the Major League Baseball team.
Sure.
But what was easy to turn to were these images. And then I had years of what I would call sobriety in the ministry when I worked with you, and I wasn't doing anything, but I still found myself slipping into these places where I would spend time in my mind like the Brian Wilson Beach Boys song, in my room. I think we all have a bedroom, especially in as adolescents, and even as we get older, we have a space that we want to just be left alone, and we get lost in our own thoughts. And so even though I was successful in a lot of the things I did in ministry, I found that the shame and the failures of mistakes, I would only be able to find relief in my own mind in terms of things that I could turn to that, as I warn pastors, beware of things and people that never say no. And those things that don't say no become objects of soothing.
Yeah.
And it could be any number of things that we can turn to. But that for me was where I had to realize that if I don't say no for them, they won't say no to me.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen overnight. I mean, I made one. I remember reading a Christianity Today, and they had an article on internet pornography, and they cited a website. And I figured, well, if it was in Christianity Today, it must be okay for me to look it up. And well, I did, and it was probably maybe early 2000s, and there was now a new world open to me. Yes. And if I didn't have a good Sunday, if I had a difficult meeting, then I started to self-soothe in new ways. It used to be other ways, but now I began to discover that there was opportunities to access pornography free that never said no, and I became more and more intrigued and caught up in this downward spiral of pornography.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to get to, it later in terms of the conversation, because the conversation kind of continues, but I want to talk about a word. You introduced me to this word, and then you actually, after I mentioned it, you kind of sent it to me because I'd never heard of the word, edging. My guess is that there are a lot of people listening or watching here on the YouTube channel who are in the process of edging. What does edging mean?
Yeah, edging is probably what it sounds like for a lot of people, but it's playing fast and loose with our behavior or our addiction. So typically an essay definition of sobriety is no sex with oneself or anyone other than your spouse. An SPA, sex and pornography addiction, adds and no pornography.
Right.
So it's like the letter of the law is we don't do those three things.
Right.
But the spirit of the law is, well, we start to think about, I can look at certain catalogs or watch certain films.
Right.
And there's not any overt nudity or pornography, but there's the things, we call it the slip before the slip.
Right.
So if you start edging and experimenting, then maybe the best way to think of edging is David and Bathsheba. David's men are off to war. He goes out into the balcony, and he's clearly bored and clearly restless, and he sees a woman, and rather than turning away from her, he starts edging.
Yes.
Finds out who she is, plays games, then he locks in. It's the slip before the slip. Yeah. And edging can be cruising locations. It could be going to the beach with the intent to go on a walk. But meanwhile, what you're doing is you're looking and you're lusting.
Yeah. Right.
And eventually, if you give in to looking and lusting, you're going to start acting out.
Right. Right. And so edging, you go to the edge. You've even found yourself, you were edging because, pornography is not the right thing to do. It is not healthy. It's not right. But you were edging, and then I call these emotional affairs. That sometimes they're an emotional affair, and then it moves farther than you ever imagined.
Right.
So as you kind of kept going on in this thing, were you shocked?
Absolutely shocked. I remember realizing what I was doing and how could I compartmentalize? How could I do this on Saturday, then Sunday morning preach?
Yeah.
And then Monday morning, I would get sober every Saturday.
Sure.
I'm done. I'm not going to look
Right.
at anything tonight. I'm not going to
Right.
do any edging at all. I've got to preach. And then would come the high and the low of preaching. And then the low on Monday was usually met with, I've got to find some way to self-soothe. And the things I would turn to would be typically fantasy.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I've heard you talk about, you have had, as most people, and especially pastors, we're not just talking about pastors today, but you talked about having a need for approval.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't find that growing up. It sounds like you didn't find that with your dad.
Right. Yeah. No, my dad never said 3 words to me in our house. One was love, one was proud, one was sorry.
So tough.
So I spent really, as I look back on my life, I'm looking for a father. You were one of them, Jim.
Yeah.
A father figure that saw something in me, affirmed me, and I became part of my addiction. If I identify myself in meetings, and I do every Saturday, is I'll say I'm a sexaholic with tendency to people pleaser and codependent. And so you roll it on the one, you can see it becomes a real toxic cocktail of a relationship and fantasy and afraid to hurt people's feelings. But my father, because there was no foundation of grace, I could not, one, tolerate, I had an aversion to conflict, and then I had a high need for approval.
Mm-hmm.
Those two don't go well together.
No.
And so I began in college and high school looking for coaches and professors and people. Ironically, I found that the word mentor comes from Greek mythology. Odysseus goes off to war, leaves his son behind with a man named Mentor to complete his parenting.
Yeah.
And I've been looking for mentors, even at 63, men who can speak into my life, encourage me, and give me the things. Because even though the church was fantastic, the youth group was fantastic, it, as my first therapist once said to my wife, Chris's affirmation bucket has holes in it. And just as fast as he gets the affirmation,
he needs it.
He needs more affirmation.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't see that. I mean, I didn't see that in you. I didn't know that. But it's true for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So approval, there's a time when, as a mentor, somebody in your life, I mean, a teacher, a professor, a pastor, whatever, they're mentoring you. That's beautiful. At the same time, people who need approval, if they're at work and the woman who might be kind of needy, she's, pretty enough and she just thinks you are the cat's meow, that's where it sometimes, I'm not just talking about men because this happens with women too, but with a man, sometimes it's not, they weren't like attracted at first sexually, they were attracted to the approval. Because your wife's saying, hey, our toilet is clogged up.
Right.
The kids are driving me nuts. Right. You're driving me nuts. You're working too many hours, whatever it might be. And so we tend to then move that into a romantic relationship.
Right. Yeah, and for me, what I can identify with was the adolescent nature of infidelity. You aren't paying taxes. You aren't changing diapers. You aren't taking the trash out. It was just simply juvenile.
Yeah.
And it was a fantasy of there was no reality to it. And whenever I would have those moments of reality of what am I doing, and why am I entertaining these compliments and affirmations, I had to keep coming back to, and I didn't do it well. Obviously, I crashed. Yeah. But then in recovery, I've learned that what I need are men of grace and truth that I can share my fears and failures with.
Good.
And that's my way forward. And that's how I've gotten, I can pursue the things that I need, but I pursue them in the right relationship, in the right context. And I ask pastors this question that I wish someone would have asked me is there anyone at church that if you don't see this person, you're disappointed, or someone that you're hoping to run into?
Yeah.
And, for a lot of pastors, it's this, there is someone that I look forward to seeing. Well, what is it that you look forward to? What is it about that? Well, it's almost always they love my haircut, they love my shirt, they love my sermon, they love and it's always flattery and affirmation, and it's probably not sincere. And even if it is, it's dangerous.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that with pastors, because it is, and you work with pastors. That's everybody.
Yeah,
that's the business world. That's the ministry world. And it's just the opposite too. I mean, here's a woman who's lonely, and her husband's put all of his energy someplace else. Her husband doesn't know how to communicate and whatnot. And all of a sudden, a guy comes along and says, "You're beautiful. You're wonderful. You're amazing." And so they take that differently.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they find themselves in a compromising situation they honestly didn't see. Now, I love the word recovery.
Yeah.
And you use that word a lot. Recovery means we have been in a deep hole, but through God's grace and love, we can find hope, have hope, and we can experience recovery. I mean, that's what we're talking about today in many ways. There's a good news to this. Recovery is on multi levels, if you would. You said once you had to fight for your marriage once you were kind of caught, if you would. What did that mean for you?
Yeah, for me, it meant my first therapist asked me, I said, do you think I can make it? Do you think we can make it? He said, Chris, I've got 2 questions for you. And if you can answer them both yes, then you and your wife, you can make it. Question 1, can your wife forgive you? And I knew that she could, and I knew that she was practicing for her forgiveness, which was not easy to do.
No.
Secondly, could I go through the hard conversations, the honest conversations, the things that I was really reluctant to have because it forced me to face rejection and face honesty and shame and guilt and fear. It forced all that to the surface.
Were the hard conversations with your wife, you're saying, or with others?
With my wife primarily, but with others because I was very good at falling on my sword in conflict with elders and in any kind of conflict in church or family or marriage. I was the one who would admit fault, even if I wasn't always at fault. Or I just wanted it to be smooth water.
Yeah, that's people pleasers. I've done that many times.
Yeah. And so coming into recovery, sobriety is stopping something. Recovery is beginning something new. It's a new habit. Yeah. So gratitude was a big part of that, but honesty is a big part of recovery. Yes. And intimacy, which I thought I was okay with intimacy emotionally. It turns out I'm really scared of letting you see me, me see.
Sure. Yeah.
I remember I heard that definition. I thought, that's so corny.
I know.
But now I realize it freaks the heck out of me because I'd rather talk about you. And as Pastor Chris, but how are you
have a
doing?
role. Sure. Yeah, you have a role. And so it's what you're saying is what's hard. I always say the phrase, before freedom comes pain. And if somebody's caught in this cycle and they're going to talk to their spouse about it, and I recommend a lot of times they do that with counseling, not just on their own, because they could really muff it up. Yeah. But sometimes before you can have freedom out there. Yeah, asking that counselor, is there hope?
Right.
Sure, but there's going to be some painful moments.
Oh my gosh.
Rejection, you said.
Rejection and it's 3 to 5 years before the conversations can move past. Can we keep going? I mean, men ask me all the time, how long will it take before my wife takes the divorce card off the table? I said 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And then a lot of men will say, I don't think I said, okay, then this is it. This is what we're talking about. If you can stay with it, you can keep working. Yeah. There's hope. But I said that you didn't get into this overnight and won't go away overnight. Forgiveness and consequences are not mutually exclusive. Yeah. And so it took us moments to get into trouble with. May take years, months, years to work through and sort out the roots of these things. Where did this come from? Yeah.
I my guess is, you mentioned your dad and not getting approval from your dad. My guess is partly through, the Bible says where there's no counsel, the people fall, and the multitude of counselors are safety. Some of the things, like my dad was an alcoholic. He was a good man. I don't have a lot of that. I mean, I knew I was loved, etc. But my normal was, so I didn't know what was normal. So I didn't have all these big dad issues or big dad wounds at the beginning because I just thought that's what dads do or whatever. Then when you get some counsel, when you start growing in your own life, growing spiritually, recovering, whatever it is, then you start looking back and going, oh, I've got to work on that issue too. It's kind of like an onion peel, I'm assuming.
Completely.
This is so amazing. When we come back, we have a lot more to talk about. I kind of feel like we're walking on holy ground. I want to ask you about how counselors, because you keep bringing up the word, and groups, kind of came alongside you and your family. But we're going to take a quick break. Important conversation today with Chris Cannon. Chris is the founder of a nonprofit called Sword and Shovel, as well as he leads literally on our team at HomeWord, the Pastor to Pastor ministry, which is amazing. Go on the HomeWord website and you can learn all about that, or you can go to also just type in Sword and Shovel Chris Cannon and you can see that as well. For all information about Chris and his great work, it's all in our podcast notes. We'll be right back. More to come. Hi, Jim Burns here. I am so excited about what's going on at HomeWord. Some of you are just learning that things are changing around here, and one of the most exciting things changing is our new president, Marcus. And Marcus, tell us what's going on with HomeWord.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Really appreciate it. So excited to share with you, give you a glimpse of what God is doing in this new season at HomeWord. And it's a blend. It's a blend of new and tried and true. And our mission right now is, how do we take these 4 decades, these 40 years of ministry, of resources, of principles that God has been changing lives throughout the nation and beyond, and expand that, but also tether it to a younger generation. And the way we're going to do that is through a blend of tried and true resources and principles and events, as well as new initiatives. And I'll start off with the new. On the new side, we have a new website. We are rebranding. We've got new staff. We've got new faces and new voices to our growing social media presence, and that is wonderful. But also on the tried and true side, we've got a Refreshing Your Marriage retreat that has been an amazing, impactful event. We've got our conferences like Trainer for Trainers, and our resources like our books that we're going to continue to write and expand and change lives. Speaking of which, Jim, share with us the latest update of what's going on in the book world here at HomeWord.
You got it. And I'm excited about your leadership, and I'm excited about where we're going at HomeWord. It's going to be pretty incredible. We've got a book, Doing Life with Your Adult Children. We have other books, of course, but that's still on the bestseller list after 5 years. Even this month, it's on the bestseller list. And now there's a new one that's going to be coming out called When Your Adult Child Strays, Trading Heartache for Hope. And I'm doing this book right now, and there's going to be a course with it. And we have other books on sexuality and things like that that are really, really making a difference all around this world.
So with all the things going on right now at HomeWord, here's what you can do. God is putting in our heart this desire and this plan to expand our Refreshing Your Marriage conference that I recently attended, and it helped my wife and I have a breakthrough that God was working in our hearts for a while. But beyond that, I saw other couples experiencing the same thing. So we are going to expand our Refreshing Your Marriage conference, take it to other cities, and we want to be able to not only help make sure that happens, but also those that can't afford it, that need to be resourced and some scholarships. So we want to make sure nobody misses out on a chance to get their marriage refreshed and to draw closer to the Lord. So I'm asking you to make a special gift above and beyond to support that. Thank you so much, HomeWord.
Welcome back. I'm Jim Burns. A great conversation today with Chris Cannon. Somebody you know needs to hear this. And by the way, somebody you know, Chris, you were just telling me that there's new research out, and it's staggering.
Yeah.
The number of men who are struggling with porn addiction.
Yeah. You know, the largest purveyor of pornography offered 1 free month of pornography in March of 2020. You can imagine what that was
March
all
of
about.
2020. We're talking COVID.
Beginning of COVID. And kind of playing on the act that men are going to be home, or women, and are going to be isolated, home, working from home. Here's a free month. It's like going to Costco, but 10 times 100 in terms of the sampling.
Yeah.
And the numbers have skyrocketed and stayed this way. So 62%, according to the latest research from Barna, 62% of men are claiming to have a sex addiction issue or challenge.
Yeah.
And only 1 out of 10 churches currently is offering resources for men and women that are struggling with porn.
Right. That's a huge, huge number. Kind of taking that and then going toward recovery, you've mentioned the word counselor. So you've talked about counselors and groups you're involved in, individuals who've kind of come alongside you. And many people walked away from you when this was kind of found out in your world. You're a public figure, the church, I'm not sure that again, this is my own opinion, but I don't know that the church, we don't know how to do this. Right. It's not always the church's problem. It's the person who made this decision, but at the same time, the church could have done it a lot better. I know that in your case. You went to people, you went to counsel. Your wife encouraged you that you'd better go to counsel. She has that background. But you did the work, or maybe I should say you did the work, but I want you to help us understand, how does that work to go get help with groups and recovery and people and individuals? I know there's not like the perfect formula, but there kind of is a way that I see a lot of people who actually have found victory. They actually do kind of the same stuff. What do they do? What did you do?
Yeah, well, it started. I mean, my situation being public was easier for me to, in one sense. Everyone knew. Yeah. But I remember a therapist in our community who's well known in the sex addiction world sent a message to me via a friend saying, "I heard you might need a friend," and opened the door for me to meet with him. Yeah. But it was admitting my powerlessness, and that's step one in every step meeting.
Sure.
And I I chafed at that. I went to my first essay meeting, and I said, I don't need to be here. I'm not going back. I'm not powerless. I made some bad decisions, but I'm not powerless.
Yeah.
And somebody once said, well, how would you describe the constant series of bad choices that you made over and over again, knowing what you know about all these things? What would you call that? Okay, insanity, powerlessness. Okay, I'm in. And I realized that I needed to be in a community of men who I could confess my fears and failures with, who still love me. Because I remember reading Genesis 3 recently, when after Adam falls in the Garden of Eden, and God says, "Who told you were naked?" Because Adam says, "I heard you. I was ashamed. I was afraid, so I hid."
Yeah.
And to me, that's the three elements. Fear, shame, and isolation are the three monsters in our lives.
So good.
And when God asks the question, he's basically implying, I didn't tell you that.
Right.
You told yourself that. You told yourself these things. And we do a lot of self-talk. And so we really encourage men, and I was encouraged, bring it into the light.
Yeah.
Bring whatever it is that you don't want to talk about. And this is what I ask pastors, what don't you want to talk about? And let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And because I'm not going to judge. I've seen it, everything. I've done everything I can imagine anyone would say. But it starts with, let's put it on the table, and I'm going to reaffirm over and over again, thank you for sharing. Thank you for the privilege of sharing. And what I got when I began telling my story was I got respect, which was ironic, sharing a first step in front of a group of people you don't necessarily know, and telling their story from age 8 when I found a Playboy magazine in Mr. Jones's bathroom to all the way through to an affair.
Right.
And confessing that and then receiving grace was the first big step toward living in the light.
Isn't that interesting? So yeah, that makes sense. That's a hard thing to do. I had a pastor call me a number of years ago, actually his wife, not him, and he'd been caught with pornography and prostitutes, and it was crazy kind of a thing. And not all pastors obviously have that story, but there's, like you say, there's a lot of pastors who struggle. And so I called a friend of mine, and actually Kathy and I paid for him to go to something called Every Man's Battle. It's a workshop for people who are struggling with sex addictions. He said to me it was harder to tell people his story than it was to do anything else. He said it was the hardest thing he had ever done because he had hid that pretty well.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying is this is not an easy step.
No, but it's the biggest step of freedom. I did Every Man's Battle 10 years ago, right?
Wow.
I mean, within months after I resigned, I was in Irvine at Every Man's Battle when the book that every man should know about, who's a Christian man, even if they're not a Christian man, is Worthy of Her Trust.
Yeah.
And it's co-written by Arter Byrne and it's Jason Martinkus, but it's a blueprint for moving forward, and the title gives away the purpose, which is rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
But the thing that we don't think will happen, we think that when we tell our story, we're going to lead to shame and rejection. Yeah. Ironically, every man says, "Wow," says "me too."
Yeah.
And I think it was C.S. Lewis who once said, "Real friendship begins when one man says to another, 'What, you too?'" Now they're up to 1.5 years, 2 years. So I said to them recently, I said to the guys, what do you think, what's the secret sauce? Because we aren't doing a lot of things that are traditional for recovery meetings, but we went back to that passage in James.
Yeah.
Confess your sins one to another that you may be healed. And what they would all say if they were on this podcast today, they would say, hey, it was the grace environment to confess our temptations and our fears, and we weren't rejected, we weren't kicked out, we weren't ostracized. I remember in college admitting to a guy that I wanted to be accountable to for pornography. And at the dining hall later on in that week, in front of about 5 guys, we're at our table at the booth at Westmont. He goes, "Hey, he's still doing that thing with porn."
Yeah,
it was mortifying.
He was not safe.
It was not safe, and I thought he was. I can still tell you exactly what I was wearing, what he was wearing, where the table was, because I told myself I will never, ever share my personal failures with another man again.
Right.
And I think a lot of men have been hurt by the accountability movement that we had, that we all remember back in the late 80s. And I think that rather than we created an environment of finger pointing more than an environment of grace.
Right. Yeah. And of course that depends. I mean, I was in an accountability relationship with a friend of mine named John Wallace for 40 years.
Right.
And we were very open with each other, but I've never received more grace in my life than from that man. And yet at the same time, he was strong with me. Absolutely. I needed, as a man, I needed that. What do you do when you confess your sins to your spouse and your spouse does reject you?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. You don't let that turn you back to the things that don't say no, because this is a common malady for men. Is my wife said no to me. My wife isn't in the mood. My wife is rejecting me. She's angry at me. And then what we can either do is we can either stay in that tension and work toward honesty and work toward, when you say that hurts me, I just want you to share with you. Or we just turn our backs, our literal, spiritual, emotional backs and say, well, I'm going to find something or someone that doesn't say no to me or reject me.
Right.
And that's where we create that spiral for a lot of men. But for the men that are willing to do the work, and I'm not saying that I've been that guy up for 10 years either. I'm scared to death of real, honest conversations where it brings up my shame. I'm good at being empathic when it's not my issues.
Sure.
But when it comes to me talking about my failures with my wife, boy, I lock up with fear, and I have a hard time, even though she's great to talk to and very therapeutic, but it brings up all of my dad stuff.
Yeah, your dad stuff, your insecurities, all the whole thing. Now, obviously people who are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, there's a ton of them who are in the midst of at least edging. Mm-hmm. When you said 62% of men are struggling, so pretty much that's a whole lot of men. They're in full-blown, deep, maybe even in an immoral relationship. Mm-hmm. But if you add even your edging illustration, what's the message to them today?
Yeah, the message is, it's like in Proverbs when it says that don't think that you're the guy that can put fire in your lap and not get burned. Eventually there's going to be some painful consequences. But it's not just the consequences, but we're missing out on the life that is really life. Right. We're missing out on the relationships because fantasy and edging is a point of disconnecting from reality. We're disconnecting, and I want to emphasize that word is powerful because we're not connecting. We bypass intimacy for fantasy. Yeah. And edging is a form of bypassing relationship and intimacy. Yeah. And so I would say, listen, men, I understand. Let's circle back into a relationship with other men as a way to grow in your own relational capacity for honesty and for struggle. Right. But if you are in the process of edging, and first of all, you're not alone. You're not alone. Sure. Don't think that when you drive by certain things or revisit certain locations or glance at certain movies and things that you're the only guy that does that. Right. You're not. And there are other men just like you that are trying to get free of the compulsive lure of fantasy and disconnection that promises things it can't deliver.
Right. So good. Now let's turn it a little bit because we've been talking a lot about men, but to the spouse, woman, who maybe her husband is involved in pornography. Mm-hmm. And again, I realize that women struggle too, different ways. Mm-hmm. Their intimacy looks differently sometimes. But to the spouse who's struggling, what do you say to her? She's lost. She's hurt. She's angry. She's frustrated. She's blaming herself sometimes. What do you say to her, and what can she do?
I can say what my wife says, since I don't have that conversation directly
Yeah.
with women, but I can say what I know from my study and experience and training thus far is hold the line, hold the boundary, don't become enmeshed, don't. I know I can already hear some people saying you've got to accommodate your husband, your body's not your own.
Yeah.
But there are lines and boundaries that need to be held, because if men, adversity is a better teacher than prosperity.
Yeah.
And if you want your husband to grow, adversity is the best path for his growth. It's going to be hard. He's going to complain. He's going to make noise. I did. But the way forward is adversity that leads you into the space where you grow, and he'll become the man you want him to be if you don't enable him to stay where he's at.
Okay. Good word. We don't have much time left, but in conclusion, if somebody said, I'm willing, I want to take the first step, where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's some great programs in churches, Celebrate Recovery, Pure Desire, Ted Roberts up in Oregon. It's great stuff that he's got going on. I go to SA meetings too, because frankly, for me personally, I found the level of honesty there is profound. If you want a Christ-centered one, there's good ones, like I mentioned, Celebrate Recovery and other ones. I would say get yourself into a place where you're not living in isolation with your own fear and failures and frustrations. Take the courageous step of making that call and making that, get coffee with someone, reach out to Sword and Shovel, or if you're a pastor, get me at HomeWord, chris.cannon@homeword.com, and say, I heard the podcast, to watch the podcast. I'd like to, and this is what I tell men, you might want to begin with, I know a guy. That's code for, right. So I say, maybe you know a guy, and give me a call, and let's talk about the guy that you know that might need some help. But let's get that because we got to get it out of the darkness of our hearts and out in the open where we can receive grace.
Right. Such a good word. We could be talking about this all day. And there are great resources, and we're going to put a couple of other resources too. He mentioned them. We'll put them in the show notes, as well as some of the resources. He talked about Every Man's Battle, Restore for Women, which is incredible. That's with New Life Ministries, CovenantEyes.com. There are just so many great organizations out there who can help and heal. But the ones he mentioned are phenomenal, and we'll have a list of those in our podcast notes. So, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for being courageous. Thank you for being a person who's been now sober for over 10 years that way. And I remember you telling me once that, sometimes you'll be in a group and you'll say, I'm Chris Cannon. I've been sober for 10 years and so many months. And other times you'll say, I'm sober for today. But sometimes the younger people don't want to hear that, because they want to hear that there's hope. Mm-hmm. You brought us hope today.
Yeah. Well, good.
Thank you.
It's how God redeems failure.
Yeah. So good. Hey, listen, if you're struggling with this, don't settle alone. Make sure that you reach out, get the help you need. There's help around you. You just got to find it. And I know it's not easy. And I know it's not easy to say those first words, but do you really want to live a life with the lack of integrity that you're living right now, when you can live really with a life that has great meaning and great hope? Never perfect. And nobody said it's going to be easy. This may be the hardest thing you ever do. But for yourself and for the trajectory of your family, know that you can overcome this. You can recover and not just keep repeating. Okay? Good. Great conversation today. Again, send this to somebody who needs this. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Subscribe. I hope you'll subscribe. And you can also get more information at HomeWord.com. And actually there you can also get more information on Chris as well. So thanks for listening today. I'm Jim Burns.